Yeah, progressive cider, you know they wiser. Ooh, this that new media company covering everything. I'm talking that news you ain't heard of, cause you know it's getting buried. Social justice, yeah, the stuff you need to know about. Fucking politics that the corporate news won't cover. You know they don't think that you could see under, but you can now, cause the people we cover, they may not be famous, but their stories should be heard. Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. That was enough of that. We got a ton of shit to talk about today. So first up, let me do a quick shout out to, look, I always hate going into critique and criticism of independent media. However, Jimmy Dore, let me just say this. It is so easy. If we did an entire program cutting down people in a roast, a comedic roast, that's easy. Educating people on how things really are, that's tough. So I would invite you, before you do another show where you're also hawking donations, before you start criticizing independent media, maybe take a look at the education piece on that. So that's my shot across the bow for Jimmy Dore. Anyone else who's tuning in, stay tuned, hold on to your seats, because we're going to talk about some educational pieces you may or may not have known, and we want you to chime in here. Tell me where I'm wrong. And back it up with facts. So before we get into all of that, good morning, Andy. How has your morning been?
Apparently better than yours.
Oh, I'm pissed this morning. I'm just there's so much wrong with so many things. It was hard to narrow it down to a specific subject, but we had some really big things happen yesterday we have to talk about. So first and foremost was Attorney General Barr testified before the House Judicial Committee, and boy, what a shit show.
Now, can we give him a nickname? Can we put an F on the end of that?
Barf. Maybe. And I gotta say, as I was watching the testimony, so you didn't have to, as I was watching the testimony, I was like, okay, from a PR perspective, he did this totally perfectly. He looked like a sad puppy dog throughout the entire thing. And then he spoke very quietly and very humbly and used law and order. I think I counted 300 times. Yeah. So he was, from a PR perspective, he was perfect. It was the best portrayal of somebody who is a patriot and has America in their heart. Yeah, right. But what he said, there were some things that he said that I just was like, holy shit, I can't believe he put that on record. So it wasn't just Barr, it was Democrats. And if you watch this thing at all, it was useless, completely useless, because what you had was one side going, you suck and we're awesome, and then the other side going, you suck and we're awesome, and very little information actually came out.
Sounds like a Twitter argument.
It was the congressional equivalent of a Twitter argument, and so there wasn't a whole lot that came from it. It was more kabuki theater. So hey, good morning, Mike. How are you? Mike chimed in this morning. So Mike, I got a topic for you, and I'm gonna go ahead and tease it right now. Stingrays. I know you know about stingrays, so we'll get to that in a minute, but that actually came up during the hearing. So
looking forward to Corvette bringing back that brand.
It's not a car. It's not a car. This is all part of our new and improved police state. And what I found, in the back of my head, because I follow these things, and some people don't. We're red team, blue team, yay, go team. We forget that it was a bipartisan vote that just funded all of the police state apparatus just, a week and a half ago?
Mm-hmm.
And
yes.
then, yeah, the Patriot Act and all of these things that have come about ushered in what we're seeing in Portland. So it's not a red team, blue team. This is, hey, welcome to the police state. We are now living in snow crash. The only thing that we're missing is being able to rent like a container at a box store or something like this, U-Haul, to live in. That is all that we're missing, and I see that coming very soon. So
Do they make those with windows? Like, it's never bright in those things, right? The U-Haul containers. We need like skylights or something in those if you seriously want to live in one. I think.
well, the people who actually use them for small houses and things like that, I think they do. They cut out some of the side of it. But in Snow Crash, this was you went to a U-Haul place and they had stacks and stacks of these things, and you rented one of those storage facilities as your home. So you were responsible for your own flashlight and whatever. They didn't have electrical access per se. So, but you were too poor to afford it. So that's how it went. So, yeah, in my household, so I'm married to an Uber geek. We have a little statue of hero protagonist. And, so it always reminds me of Snow Crash, and I'm like, yeah, more and more every day we're getting closer to that. So I pulled a couple clips from, these are short clips. This is not the hours and hours. Short clips from Barr's testimony that I wanted to talk about this morning, and put it all in context. So for the Jimmy Dore fans who are tuning in, you're going to learn something today. We're not just going to bitch and complain. We're going to teach you some things, because we're all about critical thinking here, not just complaints. So let's start with Barr. Okay, yeah, let's start with Barr, and this is his testimony because, okay, Nadler in New York, who just won his primary against a progressive. So Nadler, you'll recall, was the architect of the failed impeachment strategy. So that was, rather than going after all the other illegalities in this current administration, they narrowed it down to a 2-minute phone call, partly because they were trying to protect Joe Biden. So obviously that failed. And we saw Shahid Buttar had written about that 2 years ago.
You were so close. You're so
Shahid.
Thank you.
Shahid. Like hide and seek. In my head I go hide and seek. Shahid. So he had written about it, admonishing them, hey, don't do this because you will lose. And what did they do? They did it and they lost because it's theater. It's not meant to actually enact some change. So that came up during the testimony here because Nadler, he was grilling Barr on the names of these police state programs. So I just want to play this real quick. It's very short. Here we go.
All right.
At the same July 22nd press conference, you initially claimed that over 200 arrests had been made under Operation Legend, correct?
Correct.
But you misspoke.
Correct.
The U.S. Attorney's Office for the Western District of Missouri later confirmed that only a single arrest had been made under the auspices of Operation Legend, correct?
I don't know.
And the 199 other arrests were made under Relentless Pursuit or other programs. Well, that was correct. I think you could be forgiven for being confused. Operation Legend appears to be little more than a repackaging of existing operations in these cities. So why all the drama? Why join the president at the White House to announce a bold new operation that appears to be neither bold nor new? Understandably, Americans are very suspicious of your motives here. There are those who believe you are sending federal law enforcement into these cities not to combat violent crime, but to help with the president's re-election efforts. The president has made clear that he wants conflict between protesters and police to be a central theme of his campaign. So let me ask you directly, Mr. Barr. Yes or no? Yes or no? Did you rebrand existing projects under the Legend in order to assist the president in an election year?
I wouldn't call it. I wouldn't.
Attorney General, would you agree with me, at least on principle, that it is improper for the Department of Justice to divert resources and law enforcement personnel in an effort to assist the president's re-election campaign?
No, Mr. Chairman. In the fall, we did inaugurate an anti-crime initiative because we were concerned about increasing violent crime in a number of cities, and we call that relentless pursuit. Unfortunately, COVID intervened, and our agents who were detailed for these assignments could not perform the operation. So the operation was squelched by COVID. So we couldn't complete or make much progress on relentless pursuit. However, in the intervening time, we saw violent crime continuing to rise, and a lot of that was triggered by the events after the death of George Floyd. So we did reboot the program after COVID started breaking and we could commit the law enforcement resources to actually accomplish the mission, which is to reduce violent crime. Now, I regret that COVID interrupted our law enforcement activities, but it doesn't obviate the fact that there is serious violent crime in these cities. These police and mayors have been asking us for help, and we have put in additional federal agents and investigators to help deal with it.
Okay, so here's what I saw on that. So we heard about all of this money that is going to fund police action in several different cities. Most notably, these are the sanctuary cities, but we talked about that. But all of millions and millions of dollars is going to address a rise in crime. And then Barr himself said, oh, but because of COVID, we had to. So here's what caught my attention. Millions of dollars are being spent to fight serious crime during a significant economic downturn, and then on top of it you had COVID, which affected their operations and the economy as a whole. So that to me was like, oh, wait a second, we have a cause and effect here. So we are going to address the symptoms and not the cause. Well, that is completely rational in a neoliberal neocon mindset. We're not going to address the root cause. We're going to solely focus on crime and punishment. And I was like, why do we keep making the same mistakes over and over again? Oh, good morning, Sherry. Hi, hello, how are you? So Andy, that one, and this is why I talked to you about this morning earlier, this is an economics discussion, not law and order. So again, you know, Barr and Trump's entire campaign theme is law and order. So we saw Nadler there talking about this is all to forward his campaign, and the Trump campaign is actually using video footage from Portland and other cities as part of their campaign video footage, which is ridiculous. But this is where the focus is. It's such a narrow, myopic focus. So again, you have that, the whole impeachment hearing debacle, the same kind of whittled down into a narrow argument, which Democrats are going to lose. That absolutely, because they're not stepping back to look at the big picture of it. So one of the things I went out to look at was, okay, it sounds like maybe the Democrats aren't familiar with the correlation between economy, economics, real wages, unemployment, and the relationship to crime. But then I found this really interesting report that was given to Congress, and they get this all the time, but this particular report, I want to put this up on the screen. This is the Congressional Research Service. So this was 2011. So if you remember, we had that recession in 2007, 2008. And so they went...
That small economic blip that happened? Yeah.
Right, exactly. So here's what was interesting, and I'll include a link to this so you can read it yourself, everybody out there, but you can see by their own data and their charts that every time that there is an unemployment rise where the economy itself is tanking, you see a rise in not just violent crime, but property crime. And so I was reading this report, because that's what I do, and they were on the right track. I'm like, yes, they're getting it. There is an absolute correlation here. And then on top of COVID, we have this massive spike of people who are now unemployed and going to food banks for food. They haven't gotten their stimulus check. They haven't gotten their unemployment. The people are terrified. Families are starving, and on top of it, there's a global pandemic that they talked about. Barr mentioned it, Nadler mentioned it, but they're not looking at it in terms of the economy and people's reaction. So here, this entire report given to Congress was beautiful, and then at the end, I pulled out this little piece here, and I don't know if you can read it, but Scott Levin, who is a consultant for Congressional Research Service, who pulled through this data, is a all-out neoliberal fascist kind of economist. So he looked at all this data and he concluded that, well, the relationship between unemployment and the rates of crime, typical estimates would be 1 percentage point increase in the unemployment. So he's now discounting that your money and your money situation and your food insecurity has nothing to do with crime here. Even after it was like 12 pages of data supporting that, he himself, as a nice little tidy piece to Congress, says, yeah, no, changes in the economy really don't affect crime at all. In fact, it's more attributed to non-economic factors, like increase of police. Increase of police means more crime.
It's like saying that medical debt doesn't cause bankruptcies.
Right. It's just, it's a slight factor, but it doesn't cause it. So, so he said the increased number of police, increased numbers in the prison population, like those two things don't go together. He mentioned the crack epidemic, and then he said,
From the 90s.
right, and
Yeah.
yeah, the abortion rate. Okay. So as I was going through all of this, I was reading it and I was hopeful. I'm like, okay, they're actually putting it together, the cause and the fact, and then totally lambasted their own research with this completely ignorant summation of the report that they just did. So in my in my head, I step it back to this whole thing about the Columbus statues, right? So if you go back and you read A People's History by Howard Zinn, and he has this wonderful depiction of what was actually going on as Columbus was torturing and killing the indigenous population. And this is from his own, from Columbus's own journal. What happened was the more that you put pressure on people, and we saw this with the indigenous population, they were worked harder, they were treated horrifically, they had food insecurity, they had general insecurity because you had a hostile force taking them over. Their population declined because, not just with murder and all of this, they stopped having children. And they even talk about in that in the journal how mothers who would deliver infants would drown the infants in the river because they didn't want to see their children suffer at the hands of the oppressors. So we see this if you study at all populations globally. Every time you have a police state or this kind of authoritarian rule, the population growth goes down. And we've seen that for a number of years here in this country and across the world, right?
I think this has also been the corporate business model for the last 3 decades.
Right. And you know, I had posted on my Facebook page a job offer locally where I live just outside of Chicago, where they thought this was reasonable and rational, that you were going to work 60 hours a week, 6 days a week, with no additional benefits. And that was the offer that they made. And I posted on my page to see who thought that that was reasonable. And there were some questions back and forth. Are there benefits, whatever? I'm like, wait, no, 60 hours a week mandatory. And so when you have these working conditions, of course, population growth goes down. Of course, people are going to stop having children, of course the abortion rate's going to go up. You
Who
can't.
has time for sex? If you're
Thank
working 2 or
you.
3 jobs.
And you cannot afford your children. So I always go back to, now I am personally pro-life, but I don't impose that on other people, because to me, that's a religious thing and I chose that path. So what can I do to forward my belief in a peaceful way, which is the Christian teaching? And that's where a program like Medicare for All comes in. Because we saw in Colorado, when all they did was make condoms free, and the abortion rate dropped by 40% in 1 year. That's all they did, that one thing. So if you have something, you have a people who are struggling to make ends meet, struggling for housing security, food security, all of these things, they're not going to have kids. And they're going to pursue abortion as a means to help survive. You cannot survive and then or be close to no survival and then bring a child in. They're not going to make that choice, and we've seen that throughout all of human history. So this shouldn't be a surprise. So Andy, your thoughts on economics and crime? You talked about that a little bit with one of your podcasts that you had out, that looting sometimes creates an opportunity or provides bootstraps.
Well, that's what we see, right? And then people believe that, when I always talk about free stuff, right? When people say, well, you shouldn't get free stuff. Well, we get tons of free stuff in our society. It's just some are labeled good and some are labeled bad, right? Like when we had Professor Newell on the show, when we talked about the fact that because she works for a university, her health insurance is covered by her job, right? And so that's fine, and nobody has a problem with that. But the perception is that she goes out and gets her own health insurance, that she goes shopping for her own and gets it herself when it's paid for, right? And then you take someone on the other end of that spectrum who is getting, either Medicare or Medicaid. I'm still not 100% sure how it works in the US, but whatever, because they're unemployed or because they're in poverty, right? So their health care is, for lack of a better term, from what I understand, is provided for free. But because that person is unemployed, it's considered bad. But they're the exact same thing. One is provided free by the government, and so is the other. But we label one as good and we label one as bad. So there's lots of instances in our society where stuff that is free is good because it involves people that are considered higher up in the food chain in society, like a university professor, for example, as opposed to someone who lives in poverty that doesn't have a job, right? And the narrative they put on that person is, well, they should have made better choices or they should have worked harder, right? It's their own fault that they're in the situation they're in. And we know that that's bullshit. One other thing I wanted to suggest, back to the Barr video that you just showed, is that there were a lot of assumptions that are being made that are completely inaccurate and false, right? They were talking about them like they're true, right? With the confidence of, well, yeah, because of this and because of that. And you said, well, hold on, they're not true, right? And a couple of them stood out, right? They were talking about his entire push was to fight against violent crime. And as progressives, because we have our minds open, we realize that that's bullshit because these aren't violent crimes. Violent crime is when someone attacks someone else, right? That there's violence. You can't shake a fence and call that violence. You can't start up little fire and call that violence. So that's one assumption that's incorrect. The other one that really bothers me, and if you know anything about the COVID and you haven't bought into any of the stupid conspiracy theories about masks or social distancing, you realize that COVID now is more dangerous than it was 3 months ago when it first started. Right?
That's exactly
You haven't
right. Yeah.
broken anything. You haven't fixed anything. If anything, it's worse because you convince the people that life can get back to normal. When the first thing you should be doing is shutting it all down again, because the United States is going to be devastated by this, right? And it's just the fact that the mainstream media doesn't have it in their crosshairs any longer. Well, at least as much as they used to, right? Gives them the idea that, oh yeah, well, we're better now, everything's fine, don't need to wear a mask, we're sending our kids back to school. And that's simply not the case. So there's all these assumptions that come out are said in a confident way that you have to look at and say, this whole thing is bullshit, right? Because even the reasons that he's giving for justifying an illegal act in the first place aren't even true either.
Oh, exactly. And that was really where Democrats were pushing back on that. And of course, you had the Republicans immediately, when it was the turn of a Republican representative, go back to the law and order and kiss his ass and all of this sort of thing. But the Democrats tried to hammer home the tie-in between COVID and his campaign. So we if you watch this for any amount of time, you saw very clearly that this all centered around Trump's reelection campaign for the Democrats and the Republicans. And so a lot of the information that we as the public needed just wasn't there. So yeah, to your point, Andy, we're caught in the middle. Just real quick, Sherry, who is apparently brilliant, Sherry popped up when we were talking about that study. She knew exactly who Stephen Levitt was. She said he wrote Freakonomics, and he's a neoliberal economist from the University of Chicago, Neoliberal Economics Central, which is absolutely true. So thank you, Sherry, for that. But yeah, Andy, to your point, here in the United States, we prioritize money and property. And to give you an example, like here in my own county where I live, we have an ICE detainment center. And my county board was, there was a small committee trying to decide whether we keep the ICE contract and keep that facility because they're renting out space in our jail. And they kept circling back to the economics of it, right? Because my county earns $95 per day that we detain somebody who is suspected of being here illegally. And so the conversation didn't go back to whether it was right or wrong. They kept going to, well, we stand to lose $5 million in the county. $5 million from where? Right? So that, where does that money come from and where does it go to? We have a sheriff's office who has $14 million in their budget and their ICE contract. That's above and beyond what we give them. And that, now there isn't a lot of serious crime going on where I live. There isn't.
There isn't a lot of serious crime going on anywhere in the United States, right? It's all a narrative. It's right. People are, and it all depends on what team you're on, right? And it's the perfect example, and this is, live streamers from Portland that are working with the other platform that are saying, I'm standing here with my camera, taking an overall shot of the crowd and looking down, and everybody's standing still at a fence, basically talking or just chanting or whatever, right? There's a few people that are banging the fence or shaking the fence. Somebody, has fireworks and fired it at the side of a concrete building, right? Yet, in the comments, you've got all these people saying, of course these are riots. Look at these protesters. They're violent, right? are you not trusting your eyes at all? Are you not looking at the screen? Right? We've got these people that just can't figure it out, that get a narrative from their team, right? And they go with it. I don't care if it looks like it's peaceful and all this stuff. It's surreal to me. The second you don't believe your own senses, I hate to bring up the, 1984, but here we go.
And that's exactly it. That's where. Well, let's look at what the other team says. Okay, here's Joe Biden, his statement, and this was posted on Twitter. So Joe Biden says, "I have said from the outset of recent protests, there is no place for violence and destruction of property. Peaceful protesters should be protected, and arsonists and anarchists should be prosecuted." If you stop right there, that sounds a whole lot like Trump. Because here's where I want to pull out the critical thinking. Destruction of property. Okay, so we talked about Barr said that they were trying to set fire to it. Somebody else said, well, they had graffiti on it. And so that excuses suspension of civil liberties for everyone else. And we've talked about the heckler's veto here and how that's First Amendment right. But then Biden says something else that was pretty telling. He said, peaceful protesters should be protected and arsonists and anarchists should be prosecuted.
Well, of course.
Well, hold on, Andy.
And you shouldn't be surprised by that, right?
Here's what people don't understand. Anarchist is a political belief system that is not about taking down all of government and we just have a free-for-all. It is, whether you agree with it or not, like I don't necessarily agree with libertarians or authoritarianism, but I recognize that there are some people who support that political ideology, and I will defend their right to forward that, right? They can talk about it, they can do all of that. Anarchists are the same. So here you have neoliberal Joe Biden joining Trump to condemn a political belief system that some Americans hold here. And he's saying that we should arrest anarchists. How is that different from...
This is the author of the crime bill, right?
Yeah, that's exactly... I was waiting for that.
Let's all remember, this is the fox and the scorpion story, right? When we talk about, no, I'm not going to sting you. Well, we cross the river. Well, I'm sitting on your back.
Yep.
Well,
exactly.
Why did you sting me? Now we're going to drown. Well, because it's in my nature. And a 70-something-year-old man is not going to change his ways because, well, he's in his 70s and he's just an old crotchety bastard, like most of people in their 70s. But it's just, it's the same team, right? The thing that pisses people off about Trump is that he's embarrassing, right? He plays the bright game, though. They enjoy all the things he's doing. That's why they, vote up the military budget and give him all the police powers and all the stuff that he wants because they're on the same team. He just says stupid shit.
Oh, and that's absolutely right, because we still have this fight going through Congress now for the HEROES Act is pretty much stalled. This is step 2 of supporting the people. It's supposed to be about supporting the people through this economic downturn, right? Through COVID, through everything else. But instead, they were stacking it with military spending and port projects. Well, then you have the Heroic Act that the Republicans have put forward that includes liability protections for any employer or anyone else. If you should get COVID, get sick and die, you can't sue them. And then what was it? I think it was $4 billion for new F-35s, because in America, whenever there is a threat, we always respond with military force. And so apparently COVID requires F-35s. So you can see this throughout our history of over and over and over again, wherever there's a threat. I mean, if all you've got is a hammer, everything looks like a bunch of nails. So this is what we're seeing in Portland and other pieces. So Barr's testimony and the questions that were lobbed at him, both hostile and friendly, all went to that law and order militarism framework, which I thought was both nauseating and very telling. So this is how we respond to everything. So I'm not sure what we're going to do with children in schools who are going to, either they themselves are getting sick like we're seeing in Florida, or they are going to take the exposure back to their families and others, and now we see this uptick. In fact, even here where I live in Chicago and Illinois, we are almost back to March levels. Because we don't know how to social distance, we don't know how to use masks, but we're more than willing to sacrifice our kids and teachers because of this. So all of this goes back to the economics of the situation, in that when you put it together, we started out on a path where we were allowing people unemployment and then gave them extra unemployment. And I said something on Monday I need to correct. The $600 edition was a weekly thing. I said it was monthly. So thank you for that. And there's my retraction. But all of that was in place to keep people from food insecurity, home insecurity, while we dealt with this. And then people themselves, particularly alt-right people, said, no, you got to be a patriot, sacrifice your grandma with the economy. And so we started to dismantle all that. Now we have the situation where your mortgage is due, your rent is due, that $600 goes away on the 31st of July. You better get back to work. Oh, by the way, we still have this massive unemployment and it's growing. And now we have the COVID coming back in a resurgence because we never really exited phase one. All of this is going to create more cause for civil unrest. And so now we all look like nails in a board to somebody like Barr and somebody like the Democrats and Republicans in Congress. So, yeah. Okay, so real quick, Mike Toller. Anarchism stands for the liberation of the human mind from the dominion of religion and liberation of the human body from the coercion of property. Oh, that almost sounds like Dalai Lama.
Put that on a fortune cookie.
Right. So it's an interesting philosophy, and I'll admit that I was raised to think anarchy meant complete lawlessness, and it doesn't. So I'm personally not in that framework, but I get it, and it's a political ideology that has to be protected based on the Constitution in this country. So.
Absolutely.
So here was the other thing when we talk about law and order. This was interesting. So Newsweek put this up. So if you are one of those grandmas, moms, veterans, dads who is shaking a fence in Portland, well,
shame on you.
Well, not only shame on you, but let's step back, because Barr kept saying that the city is under siege, making that reference, and it isn't. This is a very small area around the courthouse, but what federal troops are doing is going out into the city. So this whole argument that they are protecting the courthouse is right to a finite point. When they start leaving the courthouse and going into the city and arresting people and doing all of this stuff with tear gas and beating people, now they're outside of their jurisdiction, mission, and operation. And that is what people are really upset about, not to mention the fact that unprovoked, they're just coming out of the courthouse and, causing havoc. But here's what happens if you get arrested in Portland by these federal troops. So the jailed protesters must agree to stop going to protest to be freed. So you must suspend your First Amendment right in order for them to free you. All of that is illegal at
Of course it
the
is.
highest level. So some of the orders forbid defendants from attending protests in all of the state, while others only forbid protests in Portland or don't specify any geographic area whatsoever, stating do not participate in any protest, demonstrations, rally. None of that is legal. Absolutely none of it is legal. And this is where I think we kind of run aground when we're talking left, right, or whatever, because some of what Barr said was true. And then he wrapped it in this tremendous lie. And some of what the Democrats said was true. And then they wrapped it in this tremendous lie. So you get both sides not saying anything, and people are getting caught in the middle. Right? So this is not just economics, but law. So what I did see is that the Wall of Moms is now suing the federal government, which is exactly what had to happen. So in the article that we talked about Monday on our website, one of the paths forward was the Attorney General had her lawsuit, the Oregon Attorney General, State's Attorney, I'm sorry, had her lawsuit dismissed by a federal judge because the judge said she didn't have standing. So what happened was the moms, the residents of Oregon who had been fired upon, who were citizens, brought their own lawsuit, which is exactly what had to happen. You have to have standing. So now that is going forward along with all the ACLU and other things. So what I thought was interesting is the other thing Barr said was he kept saying federal rights. So Republicans have always been states' rights. And here you have Barr going, no, we're going to flip it. Federal rights supersede state rights. And I thought that was an interesting strategy, not only to keep his ass out of jail, but he's really having to do, I kind of feel bad for him from a public relations standpoint. He is having to cover Trump's ass and go through these huge hoops in order to make it stick. And so now he's full-fledged federal rights. So
I heard he's been offered a spot on the American gymnastics Olympic team.
I wouldn't doubt it. If nothing else, he could be the mascot because these are some. I'm just sitting back watching them, going, "Did he really just say that?" Okay, all right. So it's like being the PR firm for Chris Brown after he's been arrested.
Monsanto.
Yes, there you go. So one of those jobs that you couldn't pay me enough. So all right.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So I got another video for you from the same testimony, but this one is Representative. What is her name? Representative Lofgren, who was calling in. So you'll hear in this clip a bunch of dings. So what was funny is our congressional representatives were on the call, we're not muted, and they were all getting text messages, so you hear multiple dings, which is distracting. But so she asked a couple questions that led into a subject that my little ears perked up. I was like, oh, wait a second, what's going on here? So let's play her video, and this one's actually a little shorter. So here we go.
Your characterization of Portland is completely false.
I would like to, we can get into that, but I'd like to ask you a question about surveillance, if I may. We've heard reports that cell site stimulators known as Stingrays or dirt boxes are being used to collect phone call location and even content of phone calls. Drones are being used that may have facial recognition or cell phone interception technology, and that there is bulk collection of internet browsing history. What specific authority is the department using for these surveillance tools?
I really can't speak to those instances if they in fact occurred. I'm glad to go and try to determine what you're talking about.
Well, actually, I'm asking about authority, not the details.
Well, I think most of our cyber activities are conducted by the FBI under their law enforcement powers to detect and prevent crime, federal crime.
Okay, so did everybody get that? Stingrays? So I was like, I'm not familiar with this technology. But apparently, if you go out to YouTube and Google Stingray and cell phones, there's a lot of really good explanatory video that explains how this works. There's also a video where they talk about foreign agents using this technology in Washington, D.C. to scrape phone calls, information, and data from our members of Congress. So this is a known technology. It's been around for a while, and I will tell you from a marketing perspective, for almost a decade, I have been able to purchase something called fencing for my clients. So if my client was participating in a trade show at a very large convention center, I could purchase fencing technology that allowed me to push an ad to personal cell phones for my client on anybody who entered within this fencing area. And that could be within the convention center itself or within 100 yards of the convention center, under the understanding that that person was probably going to attend that convention. So I would pay for ad space, and this service would push my ad to people that I didn't even know. I didn't have their cell phone information or whatever. They just happened to be in a geographic location that I selected and paid for. So, so for all those people who were worried about COVID chip implants from the vaccine or the mask and tyranny, hi, did you pay attention to what they just said? What is going on? What this technology is? So any information that you have on your cell phone, anybody that you've called, anybody that you've texted, a private conversation between you and your spouse, your children, whatever, is being scraped up and used. And what was telling to me is where this matters. So in Portland, we saw them essentially kidnapping people. And then in New York, the video just came out. And Andy, do you mind if I do this video too? I'm doing like a series.
No, go ahead. I've already seen it. It's
okay.
It's demoralizing to see it.
Okay, all right. So this is from New York. We've seen this in Portland several times. This happened in New York. If you have graffiti or you damage property, that's criminal mischief. So there are different tiers of it, whether it's a misdemeanor or a felony. And they said that she was responsible for damaging cameras outside of the federal building. So here again, you have federal jurisdiction, federal building. They said they have evidence that it was her that did it. Well, where did they get this evidence? Was it from the camera she damaged? How did they know that she was going to be right there at that protest? Were they able to recognize her in hundreds of people walking around? Like, she's not the only white blonde woman in this protest. So how did they do it? So it was interesting in context of the Barr testimony that Stingrays and other facial recognition stuff is being used in Portland, and here we see it being used to arrest somebody, right?
And from what I understand, that woman was one of the head organizers of that. And we know that it's a common police tactic from the gentleman last week that we interviewed on Hair of the Dog that said,
Yep.
chop off the head, right? If you take away the organizer, everybody kind of loses their ability to be organized, and it kind of has a tendency to break up the demonstration, right? Let's just forget the fact that it's a total illegal kidnapping.
Right.
Right.
So this is the point that I wanted to drive home with this. It is not about crime and punishment. When you drive up on somebody, snatch them off the street, this is terrorism. And that is the purpose that it serves. It's shocking. And like you said, Andy, it's demoralizing. That's why they use it. So that the rest of the group is standing there going, holy shit, what just happened? So I remember growing up, you know, in the 80s. I'm dating myself now, but growing up, and we would hear these horror stories about Russia, that you had to be careful what you said in your own apartment, and that anytime you could be snatched up and taken away and disappeared. This is the same thing. And the whole point of it is to control behavior through acts of terrorism.
And it's not, it's in my opinion, it's worse because at least if you lived in the USSR, right, realize that it was a communist country, and the government didn't try to hide behind the false narrative of why they were trying to, silence dissidents, right? It was part of the master plan of that of their society, right? In the U.S., they talk about freedom, freedom, freedom. Meanwhile, you've got this more and more fascist regime that is using these tactics to illegally arrest people, right? All you need to do is switch teams on this. Take the progressive side that is being rounded up in this way and change it to a conservative side from a democratic regime, and there's a civil war going on, right? Everybody and their brothers got their AK whatever in their hands, marching on federal buildings, and
Right.
and just destroying everything. But because it's the other team, the people that usually are the ones that this is their narrative: America good, freedom. Don't mess with our freedom. They're changing their own narrative to suit the situation, and that's scary as hell because how gullible are you? Right?
Well, and this is where propaganda comes from. So we have seen the flagrant hypocrisy of both sides of our leadership. Democrats in response to COVID, right? So you had Nancy Pelosi um, really stalling the process and working with McConnell to stall the process so that, we go from an argument about 600 a week down to 200 a week because you really don't matter. And then at the same time, you see this hearing, which could have been productive, but instead you saw red team, blue team, one shouting at Barr and not getting an answer, and the other one placating Barr and kissing his ass. Meanwhile, as a taxpayer and a citizen in this country, I'm looking for answers, and I wasn't getting them. I was getting, the narrative portrayed by either side, and that's not okay. Because I see what's going on with the resurgence of COVID. We have parents here, and I thank God I don't have a school age kid, because I'm talking to my friends who do have school age kids, and they're like, I may lose my job, but I'm not taking my kid to this school. And others are like, well, the school said, that my student, my son, daughter could go to school, and they're just going to have small groups of 50 students. I'm like, that's not a small group. They're like, I know, but what do I do? I'm going to lose my job. And this is the situation that we are being put in
Right.
because of red team, blue team.
And explain to a 6-year-old how to social distance.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So we're looking at studies of Switzerland and all these other places. And actually what they said was the younger the kid is, it seems like they still don't have a whole lot of data, but they're saying the younger the kid is, like preschool, they maybe don't have the same synapses or risk that someone who is 5 or 6 is. So where's the cutoff, right? And at the same time, our high school students are being failed because we don't have the infrastructure to support educating them at home. So all the cause and effect is coming out now, and all of these arguments posed by the neoliberals is falling away, and we get right back to the heart of the issue, which is economic.
Right, exactly. And we see once again that in a capitalist society, a neoliberal capitalist society, the idea is that the market will fix all problems, right? That the unfettered capitalism will be responsible for making everybody whole. And it can't. For problems like these, it doesn't happen. Why? Because it's not profitable. If it's not profitable, it's not worth doing, because you're asking the private sector to do what the government should be doing
Right.
with their fiat currency,
right.
making everyone whole.
Yeah, for the law and order people, I would go back to the preamble of the Constitution where it says the purpose of the government is to protect the population, not just from hostilities, but to look out for the people, and this includes economics, right? So,
And it's the people that put you in this position.
thank
You're
you.
supposed to be a public servant. Why are you making decisions that harm people?
Right. So real quick, there are two things that I want to bring up before we get out of here. Number one is we saw the Democratic Party put together their platform. So this is the platform committee. And anyone who hasn't read the 2016 platform, which is most people who consider themselves Democrats, so there's 90% of you. Go and look at what 2016 says. It's merely a suggestion because 90% of the Democratic candidates in this presidential race did not adhere to their own policy platform. There were things in it like no PAC money and supporting access to healthcare and all of these things that candidates ignored when they were running as a Democrat. So the big news was now that you had over 100 of these DNC members, high-ranking members, who said not only are we not going to include Medicare for all, but there was a reference, a proposal for a Medicare for all like system for children, and they said no, we're not doing it. So there was such outrage that the Democrats weren't going to include this in their platform, and I'm like, who the fuck cares about their platform? They certainly don't. This is not something to argue over. What you need to argue over is the Democrats who are still saying that Medicare for all costs too much and it's not viable, and how are we going to pay for it? That's where you focus your energy. I guarantee you, they don't care about their own damn platform any more than Republicans do. So focus your energy and outrage where it's actually going to do some good. I don't know.
Right. And then it's people, all you have to do is when Trump came into power in early 17, after the election, right, and all of the things that happened right away with trying to get rid of the ACA, right, and throw people off of health care because that's, the Republican wet dream, that people said that, oh my goodness, well, they're trying to get rid of Obamacare. That's fine. I don't care if they get rid of Obamacare, just as long as they don't touch the ACA.
Right.
Right? Like that whole thing was
Yep.
going on, and we're talking about, and you had Republicans that were going to town halls, right? Or they're going to updates from their congressional their congressperson and demanding, well, now that I know that your label of Obamacare is the same as the ACA, and I'm about to lose it, now I have a problem. Right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And this is where here in this country, not only are we prioritizing money and all of these things, obviously, look who we voted in as president, but we have such sophisticated propaganda and marketing here that we soak it up. Absolutely. So this is why, government, keep your hands off my Medicare. No registration that is an administrative program by the government. So yeah. So the other thing, since we're on economics, I want to put this up here as a plug for our show coming up. I am super excited about this one. So Friday, tune in. We have the chair of Patriotic Millionaires. If you don't know who this group is, you have been asleep for the last 6-7 years. Patriotic millionaires are high net worth Americans, millionaires who are saying, please tax us at an equitable rate. So these are all the people from multiple different, they cross the political spectrum. It's not a bunch of liberals. But so we have Morris Pearl, the chair, coming on Friday to talk about what they're doing, why they're doing it, and why they think that they should be taxed, right? Because Andy, you and I know that taxes don't necessarily taxes are not required to fund certain programs. So why
So
would
taxes are not required to fund anything on the federal level.
okay,
Right?
so why what good does it do to tax somebody who's worth a couple $1 million? What does that do?
It makes them not so rich.
Well,
That's the
yeah.
that's the key, right? Like, I mean, why is it that we need to have multi-billionaires in society, right? When you have so much money that you couldn't possibly spend it all, right? What do? You buy politicians. You change narratives, right? Citizens United,
Mhm.
right? Where I want to dictate American policy, and I'm going to buy my way to do that, right? In a democratic society, it should be one person, one vote. It currently isn't that way. It's one
Yeah.
corporation, one vote.
And that's exactly it. The purpose of taxes is to guide behaviors, right? This is how we create demand in our money, right? I have to pay taxes in US dollars in the US currency. So that creates demand. I need to have those dollars to pay my taxes. Um, but like you said, it controls the behavior of these ultra wealthy people. Please stop buying my government because I am dying. People like me are dying. We cannot afford for you to keep earning these excessive incomes like Elon Musk here. He not only is getting his salary as a CEO, but Tesla is getting millions in subsidies. At the same time, Elon's out there not working, tweeting his ass off, talking about pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Fuck you, Elon. You
Yeah.
had employees who came down with COVID because your little whiny ass wanted to get back to work. Are you paying for those hospital bills? Are you paying for the funeral expenses? And this is why we need someone like Elon, first, to get him some mental health assistance. Second, oh my goodness, reinvest in your business, pay your employees a livable wage, help them with their benefits, and stop taking from the rest of us. That's the heart of it. So
That's a neoliberal mindset.
and that's
And
exactly.
the fact that Elon Musk has been his company is more innovative, it's not because he's trying to make the world better, it's because he's trying to make more money.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, if you are on our Facebook page right now, Mike has just dropped a bunch of different helpful information on the Stingray technology and MEID information that we talked about here about personal data and how it's being collected. And then I want to close out with a wonderful reminder from Sherry, who says, I am a child of the 1960s and 70s, and she says, we used to know that excessive wealth was dangerous to democracy. We forgot it. So that I think that's perfect. So
It's been the 5-decade narrative since Reagan, right?
And Reagan himself
trickle
said,
down.
yeah. Reagan himself said that it is unconscionable that the bus driver pays a higher tax rate than the millionaire. But they forgot that, right? So so with that, tune in on Friday when we will have a wonderful conversation about money from people who have the money, who ask us maybe to tax them at an equitable rate. What a bizarre concept. So tune in, and you will be able to ask questions and engage live with the chairman of Patriotic Millionaires. So check out their website, Patriotic Millionaires. And if you like what we're doing here, listen to Jimmy Dore, who says support independent media. We have a Patreon page, so it's patreon.com, digital liberation. And you can become a supporter for as small as $3 a month. And I cannot stress how far that actually goes. So
Right.
if you're...
And that's why we're going to be nice to Morris on Friday.
Hey,
'Cause
Morris.
we want money too.
I'm not going to solicit from guests, but I mean, we can, just
Wouldn't that be something? Yes. So what you say right here, live, right now.
No, that is so rude. No, you don't do that.
That's a wonderful business model, isn't it?
Wouldn't it? You put him in a headlock and like, no, you can't leave. No. We appreciate him coming on and
That's
taking
right.
his time.
Well, I'm going
do
to give
this.
you a green screen that you're not going to like.
No, Andy, that's bad. We won't do that. So, all right. On that note, we're gonna get out of here, and thank you so much for spending your time with us today. Whether you're watching this live or most of our audience is lazy and watches it in the afternoon. So, good afternoon. But we'll see you back on Friday. Thank you, and have a lovely day.
Take care.